The afternoon sun was still hanging high in the sky, casting long, golden shadows across the driveway as Mark stood by the kitchen window. He checked his watch for the third time in 2 minutes. It was a Tuesday, and like every other weekday, his mind was split between the work emails buzzing on his phone and the anticipation of his daughter's return. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, waiting for the burst of energy that usually came bursting through the front entrance at 3:15 p.m. sharp. Mark was a single father, a role he had embraced fully, even if it meant his days were longer and his nights were shorter. He brushed a hand through his hair, smoothing it back, and listened. In the distance, the low rumble of the school bus engine grew louder, creeping up the street. He moved to the front door, resting his hand on the cool metal of the handle, waiting for that familiar screech of the air brakes. When the bus finally hissed to a stop, Mark watched as the doors folded open. He expected to see Lily come skipping down the steps, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, a bright smile on her face as she waved goodbye to her friends. Usually she would run up the path, bursting with stories about art class or something funny a friend had said at recess. But today, and indeed for the past week, the script had changed. Lily stepped off the bus slowly. She clutched the strap of her backpack with one hand, her head ducked low. She didn't run. She walked with a heavy, dragging step, looking much smaller than her 7 years. Her shoulders were slumped, and Mark noticed the way her eyes darted toward the ground instead of looking up at him. "Hey, sweetie, how was school?" Mark called out, forcing a brightness into his voice that he didn't entirely feel. He hoped for a reaction, a spark of the usual joy. Lily looked up, offering a weak, tired smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It was okay, Dad," she mumbled, her voice barely a whisper as she stepped into the house and slipped her shoes off. Before Mark could even ask about her day or what she had learned, Lily made a beeline for the kitchen. It wasn't the excited trot of a child wanting a treat. It was the desperate shuffle of someone looking for fuel. Mark watched from the doorway, his brow furrowing with concern. He followed her, watching as she dropped her backpack on the floor and opened the pantry door with urgency. She grabbed the first thing she could reach, a box of crackers. She didn't even bother to take a bowl or sit at the table. She just sat down right there on the kitchen floor, cross-legged, and started eating. She ate quickly, mechanically, stuffing crackers into her mouth as if she hadn't seen food in days. "Lily, honey, slow down," Mark said gently, kneeling down beside her. "What's the rush?" "You're going to choke. I'm just really hungry, Dad," she said between bites, crumbs falling onto her shirt. "My stomach hurts." "I need to eat." Mark reached out, brushing a stray hair away from her face. Her skin felt a little clammy. "Did you not eat your lunch today?" he asked, trying to keep his tone light, trying not to sound accusatory. Lily paused for a split second, a hesitation so brief that Mark almost missed it. "I ate it," she said quickly, her eyes returning to the box of crackers. I played a lot at recess. I'm just extra hungry." Mark nodded slowly, accepting the explanation for the moment. Kids had growth spurts, he reasoned. They had days where they ran nonstop and came home ravenous. It was normal. He stood up and went to the fridge, pulling out the ingredients to make her a proper sandwich. He made a turkey and cheese with extra mayo, just the way she liked it, and cut an apple into slices. He poured a glass of milk and set it all on the table. "Come sit at the table, Lil," he said softly. "Let's have a real snack." She moved from the floor to the chair, her movements sluggish. She ate the sandwich in silence, her eyes staring blankly at the wood grain of the table. Mark sat opposite her, nursing a cup of coffee. He watched her closely. She was usually a chatterbox, filling the air with gossip about who liked who and who got in trouble. Today, the silence was heavy. "You look tired, Bug," Mark observed. "You feeling okay?" "I'm fine," she murmured, finishing the last bite of the apple. "Just tired." Later that night, after Mark had made dinner, a hearty spaghetti bolognese, he watched her eat with the same desperate intensity. She cleaned her plate and asked for seconds, which was unlike her. She was a light eater usually. When she finished, she sat back in her chair, rubbing her belly, looking exhausted. "Go get ready for bed," Mark said, clearing the table. "I'll be in to tuck you in a minute." While she was in the bathroom, Mark decided to check her school bag. He wasn't snooping, he told himself. He was just making sure she hadn't left any wet towels or rotting apple cores in there again. He lifted the bag onto the counter and unzipped the main compartment. The first thing he saw was the lunchbox. It was a soft, insulated bag with a cartoon cat on the front. He pulled it out. It was light, too light. He unzipped it and looked inside. It was completely empty. Not a crumb, not a wrapper, not a stray grape. It was spotless. Mark let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Okay, he thought, she definitely ate her lunch. If the box was empty, she had eaten the sandwich, the juice box, and the carrots he had packed. So why was she so hungry? And why did she look so drained? He zipped the bag back up and placed it on the hook by the door. He walked to her bedroom, his mind turning over the possibilities. Maybe she was hitting a growth spurt. Maybe her metabolism was speeding up. He opened her bedroom door and found her already under the covers, her breathing slowing down as she drifted towards sleep. He sat on the edge of the bed, pulling the quilt up to her chin. "Night, sweetheart," he whispered. "Night, Dad," she whispered back, her voice already thick with sleep. The next morning, Mark woke up early. He was determined to make sure she had a substantial breakfast and an even bigger lunch. He cooked eggs and toast, making sure she ate every bite before putting her on the bus. Then he turned to the lunchbox preparation. He took out 2 slices of bread, then thought for a second and added 2 more. He made a massive sandwich, layering turkey, ham, and cheese. He packed a thermos of warm soup, a bag of pretzels, a banana, and 2 juice boxes. If she's hungry, he thought, I'll make sure she has plenty. He handed her the bag at the door. It was heavy. "Here you go, Lil, I packed you a feast today." She looked at the bag, her eyes widening slightly as she took the weight of it. She looked up at him, a strange expression on her face. It looked like worry or perhaps guilt, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Thanks, Dad," she said softly. "Have a great day," he called out as she walked toward the bus stop. He watched her go, the heavy bag weighing down her small frame. He felt a sense of relief. He had solved the problem, she just needed more food. But when she came home that afternoon, the cycle repeated itself. The bus dropped her off, and she walked with that same heavy, dragging step. She came into the house, dropped the bag, and immediately went to the pantry. She ate a whole bowl of cereal before dinner, and then ate 2 helpings of chicken and rice. Mark's relief began to curdle into anxiety. He checked the lunchbox again after she went to bed. It was empty, just like the day before. But if she had eaten all that food, 4 sandwiches, soup, pretzels, where was it going? She wasn't gaining weight. In fact, her clothes seemed to hang a little looser around her waist. Her face looked a little thinner, her cheeks slightly hollow. He sat at the kitchen table long after she had gone to sleep, staring at the empty lunchbox. It didn't make sense. A growth spurt didn't explain the exhaustion, the secrecy, or the way she avoided his eyes when he asked about her day. He tapped his fingers on the table, a knot of worry tightening in his stomach. Something wasn't right. He knew his daughter, and this wasn't just a phase. There was a shadow hanging over her, and the empty lunchbox was the only clue he had, and it told him absolutely nothing. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark street. He was missing something. He could feel it. And as a father, that feeling was the most terrifying thing in the world. He knew he had to find out what was happening during those hours she was away from him. But for now, all he could do was watch and wait and pack another heavy lunch for tomorrow. The week dragged on, each day feeling heavier than the last. Mark tried to stick to his routine, but the nagging worry in the back of his mind was getting harder to ignore. He had ramped up the portions in Lily's lunchbox, packing enough food to feed a grown man, let alone a 7-year-old girl. He thought that surely if he provided enough fuel, the spark would return to her eyes. But he was wrong. That Thursday evening started like the others. The bus dropped Lily off, and she walked into the house with that same dragging step, looking like the weight of the world was on her small shoulders. Mark was in the living room, folding laundry, trying to look casual. He watched her drop her backpack on the floor and head straight for the kitchen. He heard the pantry door open, the rustle of wrappers, and then the unmistakable sound of frantic chewing. He waited a moment before following her. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a box of dry cereal, pouring it directly into her mouth. She looked up when he walked in, her cheeks bulging. There was a flash of something in her eyes, guilt maybe or embarrassment, before she looked back down at the table. "Whoa, slow down, Lil," Mark said, pulling out a chair to sit across from her. "You're going to get a stomach ache." "I can't help it," she mumbled, swallowing hard. "I'm just so hungry." Mark studied her face. She looked pale. There were faint purple shadows under her eyes that no amount of sleep seemed to cure. "Did you eat the lunch I packed today?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle. Lily nodded vigorously. "Yes." "All of it and the extra snack?" "Yep," Mark frowned. "So why are you this hungry, bug? You had enough food for 2 people." She shrugged, picking at the cereal box. "I don't know. I just get hungry." Later that night, after Lily had gone to bed, Mark stood in the kitchen, staring into the open pantry. He was trying to piece together a puzzle that didn't make sense. If she was eating the massive lunches he packed, she shouldn't be starving. But he was noticing other things now, small details he had brushed off before. He looked at the shelf where he kept the granola bars. He had bought a fresh box on Monday. It was now Thursday. He reached for the box and picked it up. It felt light. He shook it. Only 2 bars rattled around inside. There should have been 6 left. He knew he hadn't eaten them. He grabbed the bag of apples from the fruit bowl on the counter. He had bought a big bag on Sunday. There were only 2 apples left. Mark leaned against the counter, rubbing his temples. The math wasn't adding up. The food he was packing for lunch was one thing, but the snacks were disappearing from the house at an alarming rate. It wasn't just the granola bars. The box of crackers he bought last week was empty. The peanut butter jar was suddenly light. A cold knot formed in his stomach. He started to wonder if there was something medically wrong with her. He made a mental note to call the doctor in the morning. But as he looked at the empty spaces on the shelves, another thought crept in. Was she hiding the food? Was she throwing it away somewhere? He needed to check her room. Mark walked quietly down the hallway to Lily's bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and he could hear her soft, rhythmic breathing. She was fast asleep. He pushed the door open slowly, wincing at the slight creak of the hinges. He wasn't trying to invade her privacy, but he needed to rule out the worst possibilities. He scanned the room. Her bed was unmade, clothes were scattered on the floor, and her school bag was slumped in the corner. He went to the bag first. He unzipped it and pulled out the lunchbox. It was empty, just like she said. He checked the side pockets, nothing. He checked the bottom of the bag for crumbs or wrappers. It was clean. He moved to her desk, opening the drawers. He found pencils, erasers, and a few hair ties. He checked under the bed, moving a few stuffed animals aside. Nothing. He opened her closet, pushing aside her hanging dresses to check the floor. There were no hidden stashes of food, no piles of rotting apples, no hoard of empty wrappers. Mark stood in the middle of the room, feeling lost. He was relieved she wasn't hoarding trash or hiding moldy food, but the mystery only deepened. If she wasn't hiding it and she wasn't eating it all herself, because she was still coming home starving, then where was it going? He left her room and went back to the kitchen, his mind racing. He sat down at the table and looked around. The house felt quiet and still. He looked at the trash can. He got up, opened the lid, and dug through the top layer of coffee grounds and paper towels. He didn't find any whole sandwiches or uneaten fruit. He sat back down, defeated. He was missing something. He was missing a big piece of the story. He looked at the pantry again, then at the lunchbox sitting on the counter. He remembered the way she had looked at him earlier, guilt. Why would a child feel guilty about being hungry? He realized that asking her wasn't working. She was telling him what she thought he wanted to hear. She was protecting something or someone. The thought made his chest ache. He felt a sudden urge to protect her, but he couldn't protect her from a ghost. He needed answers. Mark pulled out his phone and scrolled through a few apps. He read reviews and checked prices. He wasn't a tech-savvy guy, but he knew what he needed. He needed to see what was happening when he wasn't looking. He needed to be a fly on the wall. He found a small, motion-activated camera online. It was a simple device, nothing too fancy. It looked like a small black cube. The description said it could record for hours and had a battery that lasted for days. It was small enough to hide anywhere. He hesitated for a moment. Was this too much? Was he crossing a line? Spying on his own daughter felt wrong. It felt like a betrayal of trust. But then he remembered the hollow look in her eyes, the way her ribs had felt when he hugged her goodnight. He remembered the panic in her voice when she said she was hungry. His duty as a father outweighed his hesitation about privacy. He wasn't doing this to catch her doing something bad. He was doing this because he was terrified. He clicked Buy Now and selected Next Day Delivery. The package arrived the next morning while Lily was at school. Mark opened the small box and held the camera in his hand. It felt surprisingly light. He spent the afternoon reading the instructions, fumbling with the buttons until he figured out how to set the motion detector. The hard part was figuring out where to put it. If he put it in her room, he might miss what happened in the kitchen. If he put it in the kitchen, he might miss what happened at the door. He decided the kitchen was the center of the action. This was where the food was disappearing from. He walked around the kitchen looking for the perfect spot. It couldn't be too obvious. It couldn't be somewhere she would bump into or notice. He finally settled on a high shelf in the corner, nestled behind a decorative plant pot and a few cookbooks. It was high enough that a 7-year-old wouldn't look there, but it had a clear view of the pantry, the counter, and the back door. He climbed onto a step stool and carefully positioned the tiny black box. He adjusted the lens, making sure it pointed directly at the counter where Lily usually sat to eat her snacks. He tested it once, waving his hand in front of it to make sure the little red light blinked. Then he waited. When Lily came home that afternoon, Mark felt a knot of tension in his chest. He watched her every move, wondering if she would spot the camera. She walked in, dropped her bag, and went straight for the fridge. She didn't look up. She didn't notice the small black eye watching her from the shadows. She ate her snack, did her homework, and played quietly in her room. Mark made dinner, trying to act normal, trying not to stare at the shelf in the corner. He felt like he was carrying a secret, a heavy burden of knowledge that would soon be revealed. That night, after Lily was asleep, Mark sat on the edge of his bed. He didn't want to check the footage yet. He was scared of what he might find. He was scared of seeing his daughter throw food into the trash. He was scared of seeing her sneak it into her bag. He was scared that whatever was on that camera would break his heart. But he knew he couldn't wait any longer. He needed to know the truth before he packed her lunch for tomorrow. He took the camera down from the shelf and connected it to his laptop. The screen flickered and the playback software opened. Mark took a deep breath, his finger hovering over the mouse button. He pressed play, his eyes glued to the screen, ready to finally uncover the secret that was eating his daughter alive. Mark sat on the edge of his bed, the laptop screen glowing in the dim light of his room. The house was silent, the only sound being the low hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen down the hall. He took a deep breath, his finger hovering over the touchpad. He felt a mix of guilt and necessity. He didn't want to spy on his daughter, but he was scared. He was scared that he was missing something big, something that was hurting her. He clicked the play button. The software loaded and the black and white footage flickered to life. The timestamp in the corner read 3:45 p.m., just after Lily had arrived home that afternoon. The camera was positioned high on the shelf, giving him a wide view of the kitchen. He saw the back door open. Lily walked in. Even on the grainy video, Mark could see the slump in her shoulders. She dropped her backpack on the floor, just like always, and went straight to the pantry. Mark watched himself in the background, walking in a moment later. He saw the interaction, him asking questions, her giving short answers while she frantically ate crackers. It was painful to watch. It was like seeing a movie he had already lived, but this time he could see the details he missed in person. He saw the way Lily kept her body turned slightly away from him when she ate. He saw the way her eyes darted toward her backpack a few times during their conversation. She was guarding something. She was nervous. Mark fast-forwarded through the evening. He watched them eat dinner, wash dishes, and eventually turn off the lights. The screen went dark as Lily went to bed. Mark paused the video. He rubbed his eyes. He hadn't found the answer yet. He had only confirmed that she was anxious. He needed to see what happened in the morning. He set the laptop on his nightstand and lay back, staring at the ceiling. He knew he wouldn't sleep well. He decided to leave the camera running overnight. He wanted to catch every moment of the morning routine. He set his alarm for 6:00 a.m., giving himself plenty of time to retrieve the camera before Lily woke up. Sleep came in fits and starts. When the alarm buzzed, Mark was already awake. He slipped out of bed, the floor cold against his bare feet. He crept down the hallway to the kitchen. The house was still, filled with the quiet peace of early morning. He climbed onto the step stool and retrieved the small black camera from behind the plant. He didn't watch it yet. He waited until he was sitting in his truck in the parking lot at work, the engine cooling down, before he plugged it into his laptop. His hands trembled slightly as he scrolled through the timeline. He found the spot he was looking for, 7:00 a.m. This was the time he usually left the house. He pressed play. On the screen, the kitchen was bathed in the harsh, artificial light of the overhead bulbs. Mark watched himself walk through the frame, grabbing his travel mug of coffee. He saw Lily sitting at the table, eating a bowl of cereal. She looked sleepy, her hair a mess. Mark watched himself kiss the top of her head, say goodbye, and walk out the door. The kitchen went quiet. The door clicked shut. Mark leaned closer to the screen. This was it. This was the time she was alone. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Lily just sat there, staring at the door. She finished her cereal and took the bowl to the sink. Then her demeanor changed instantly. The sleepy, slow-moving girl was gone. In her place was a child on a mission. She walked quickly to the counter where her lunchbox sat. Mark had packed it the night before, stuffed to the brim. Lily unzipped the bag. She didn't check to see if the food was good. Instead, she turned and opened the pantry door. Mark held his breath. Lily reached up to the shelf where Mark kept the snacks. She grabbed a box of granola bars. She didn't take one. She took the whole box. She shoved it into her backpack. Then she grabbed a bag of apples from the floor of the pantry. She took 3 of them, stuffing them into the side pockets of her bag. The backpack was bulging now, the zippers straining against the fabric. Mark stared at the screen, his mouth open. "What are you doing, Lily?" he whispered to the empty cab of his truck. She wasn't done. She went back to the pantry and grabbed a loaf of bread. She didn't take the whole thing, but she pulled out a massive handful of slices, about 6 or 7, and wrapped them in a paper towel. She shoved the bundle into the front pocket of her backpack. Mark felt a lump form in his throat. He had been wondering where the food was going. He had blamed himself for not buying enough, or he had blamed Lily for being a picky eater. But here was the truth right in front of him. She was raiding the pantry. She was taking the household groceries and smuggling them out of the house. The footage continued. Lily zipped up the backpack. She struggled with it, having to sit on the floor and use both hands to force the zipper closed. The bag looked heavy. It looked like it weighed half as much as she did. She stood up, swinging the bag onto her shoulders with a grunt. She wobbled slightly under the weight. Mark paused the video. He stared at the frozen image of his daughter, bent under the weight of a bag full of stolen food. His mind raced with dark possibilities. Why did she need so much food? Who was she taking it to? His first thought was fear. Was someone bullying her? Was an older kid demanding food from her? The idea made his blood run cold. He imagined a group of kids waiting for her at the bus stop, forcing her to bring them tribute every day. It would explain the fear, the silence, the exhaustion. His second thought was confusion. If she was bringing all this food to school, why was she still hungry when she came home? If she was eating it on the bus, she wouldn't be starving at 3:30 p.m. Unless she wasn't eating it at all. Unless she was giving it all away. He pressed play again. He needed to see what happened next. Lily adjusted the backpack on her shoulders. She looked around the kitchen one last time, checking to make sure everything looked normal. She moved a mug on the counter to straighten it. She wiped a few crumbs off the table. Then she walked out of the frame, heading toward the front door. The video ended. Mark sat back in his seat, the laptop cooling fan whirring softly. The mystery of the empty lunchbox was solved. She wasn't eating the food he packed because she wasn't bringing it to school. She was swapping it. She was taking the lunch he made and replacing it or adding to it with the bulk food from the pantry. But the mystery of her hunger remained. In fact, it was worse now. She was carrying a mountain of food to school every day, yet she was starving. It didn't make sense unless she was giving every single crumb away. Mark felt a heavy weight settle in his chest. He had thought the camera would give him a simple answer. He thought he would see her throwing food away or maybe eating it secretly. Instead, he saw a 7-year-old girl acting like a smuggler. She was carrying a burden that was clearly too heavy for her, physically and emotionally. He looked at the clock on his dashboard. It was only 9:00 a.m. He couldn't go home yet. He couldn't pull her out of school. He had to wait. He had to sit with this image of his daughter struggling under the weight of that backpack for the rest of the day. He closed the laptop. He felt sick. He realized he had been so focused on the food, on the physical act of eating, that he had missed the bigger picture. Lily wasn't just hungry. She was carrying a secret that was eating her up inside. And he knew, with a sinking feeling, that the granola bars and apples were just the tip of the iceberg. There was a reason she was doing this. There was a story behind the stolen bread. Mark started his truck, the engine roaring to life. He drove to his job site, but his mind wasn't on work. It was on that heavy backpack and the desperate look in his daughter's eyes. He knew the camera had done its job, but now he had to do his. He had to find out who was on the other end of that food chain. Mark sat in his truck outside the construction site, the engine cooling in the afternoon air. His hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had turned white. He couldn't get the image out of his head. Lily, his sweet, quiet daughter, shoving bread and apples into her backpack like she was preparing for a disaster. The sight of it had chilled him to the bone. He had spent the entire workday distracted, his mind racing with dark theories. He imagined older kids waiting for her at the bus stop, kids with mean faces and clenched fists demanding tribute. He imagined them taking her lunch and laughing at her. The thought made his blood boil. He wanted to drive straight to the school and demand answers, but he knew he couldn't just barge in without proof. He had to be smart about this. When the final bell rang at his job, Mark was already in his truck, speeding home. He usually stopped at the grocery store or ran errands, but today he drove straight to the house. He needed to be there before the bus dropped Lily off. He needed to have the camera ready. He needed to see if there was anything else he missed. He pulled into the driveway just as the yellow school bus turned the corner at the end of the street. He watched it in the rearview mirror, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had minutes to spare. He rushed inside, skipping the usual ritual of putting his lunchbox away, and went straight to the kitchen. The house was still and quiet. The camera was sitting on the counter where he had left it that morning. He plugged it into his laptop, his fingers fumbling with the USB cord. He sat down at the kitchen table and opened the video file. The screen showed the kitchen from that morning, the timestamp blinking in the corner. Mark took a deep breath. He had watched the pantry raid in his truck earlier, but he had stopped the video there. He hadn't seen what happened after. He scrolled the timeline forward, past the part where she stuffed the granola bars and the loaf of bread into her bag. He watched her zip the bag up. He watched her struggle with the weight. But she didn't leave the kitchen immediately. Mark leaned in closer to the screen, his eyes narrowing. On the video, Lily stood still for a moment. She took a deep breath, smoothing down her shirt. Then she turned her attention to the counter where her actual lunchbox sat. It was the insulated bag with the cartoon cat, the one Mark had packed so lovingly the night before. He had put 2 massive sandwiches inside, a thermos of soup and extra snacks. He thought he was being a good dad by making sure she had enough to eat. Lily reached for the lunchbox. She unzipped it slowly. Mark watched, expecting her to maybe take a bite of a sandwich or check to see if she had a spoon for the soup. But that isn't what happened. She reached inside and pulled out the first sandwich. It was wrapped in plastic wrap. She held it in her hands for a second, looking at it. Then she reached back into the lunchbox and pulled out the second sandwich. She placed them both on the counter. Mark felt a frown crease his forehead. "What are you doing, Lil?" he whispered to the empty room. On the screen, Lily opened the pantry door again. She didn't take any more food. Instead, she reached into a drawer and pulled out a crumpled brown paper bag. It looked like it had been used before. The edges were worn, and there were grease stains on the bottom. She carefully picked up one of the sandwiches. She didn't put it back in her lunchbox. Instead, she placed it inside the brown paper bag. Then she took a handful of pretzels from the pantry and poured them into the bag. She took 2 of the apples she had grabbed earlier and put them in the bag, too. She folded the top of the brown paper bag over, smoothing the crease with her thumb. She handled that bag with such care, such tenderness, that it struck Mark. It wasn't the way you treat a pile of trash. It was the way you treat something precious. Then she did something that broke Mark's heart. She picked up her own lunchbox. It was now half empty. She looked inside, biting her lip. She reached back into the pantry and pulled out a small, bruised banana that had been sitting in the fruit bowl for a few days. She tossed it into her lunchbox, just to give it some weight. She zipped the lunchbox up, leaving the thermos of soup behind on the counter because it wouldn't fit with the banana. She had effectively dismantled her own lunch. Mark watched, his throat tight. She had taken the good food, the turkey and cheese, the fresh pretzels, the apples, and put it into the old, crumpled bag. She had left herself with nothing but a bruised banana and maybe a few crumbs. But the video wasn't over. Lily picked up the brown paper bag. She opened her backpack, which was already bulging with the stolen groceries. She found a small gap in the front pocket and gently slid the brown bag inside. She patted the pocket as if checking to make sure it was safe. Then she picked up her backpack. It was heavy, loaded down with the pantry food and the brown bag. She groaned softly as she hoisted it onto her shoulders. She wobbled, steadying herself against the kitchen counter. She looked exhausted just standing there. She grabbed her empty lunchbox, the one with just the banana, and slung the strap over her other shoulder. She took one last look around the kitchen. Her eyes landed on the thermos of soup she had left on the counter. She looked like she wanted to take it, but her hands were full. She sighed, a sad, defeated sound, and turned away. Mark watched her walk out of the frame, a small, determined figure carrying a mountain of food on her back. The screen went black as the recording ended. Mark sat back in his chair, staring at the black screen. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had been sending her to school with double lunches, thinking he was solving her hunger problem. But she was taking that food and giving it away. She wasn't just smuggling snacks, she was giving up her own meals, she was starving herself. The sound of the school bus brakes squealing outside snapped Mark out of his trance. They were here. He quickly closed the laptop and shoved the camera into a drawer. He stood up, his legs feeling shaky. He walked to the front door just as Lily was walking up the path. She looked the same as she always did, tired, pale, her shoulders hunched under the weight of that backpack. But now Mark saw the backpack differently. It wasn't just a bag, it was a burden. It was a secret she was carrying for someone else. She walked inside, dropping the bag on the floor with a heavy thud. She looked up at him, and for the first time Mark didn't see a picky eater or a mystery. He saw a little girl who was exhausted from caring for someone else. "Hi, Dad," she said softly. Mark swallowed the lump in his throat. He wanted to grab her and hug her and tell her she didn't have to do this. He wanted to ask her who was eating the food, but he knew he couldn't, not yet. He had to let this play out, he had to know the whole story. "Hey, sweetie," he managed to say, his voice thick. "How was your day?" "Fine," she lied, her eyes sliding away from his. "Are you hungry?" he asked, knowing the answer. "Starving," she whispered, clutching her stomach. Mark walked to the kitchen to make her a snack, his mind reeling. He knew now that the hunger wasn't a medical problem. It wasn't a growth spurt. It was a choice she was making. She was choosing to go hungry so someone else could eat. The question was who? And how long could she keep this up before she got sick? As he made her a sandwich, his hands trembling slightly, Mark realized that the camera had given him the answer, but it had also given him a new problem. He knew what she was doing, but he didn't know how to fix it without breaking her heart. He watched her sit at the table, her eyes closing slightly from exhaustion. He knew he had to confront her, but he needed to do it the right way. He needed to show her that she didn't have to carry this heavy backpack alone.